Hey, beloved. I'm Lindsay T.H. Jackson, and this is Unlearning. In every episode, we explore the uncomfortable conversations you want in this safe container for ideas that you know and trust, magically weaving together storytelling, poetry, music, and panel discussions with expert guests. Unlearning is the only safe place to tackle the taboo conversations and questions that most hosts are too scared to take on. In a world where division is driving a wedge between workplaces and dinner tables, it is time to get uncomfortable and unlearn together. Let's take a deep breath together. Inhaling in, exhaling out. Inhaling in and exhaling out. And so we begin. We've got a panel of amazing contributors today to talk about unlearning cancel culture. What is cancel culture? How did we arrive at a kind of system of cancel culture that we are all rather plugged into? What's the history of cancel culture? What's the future of cancel culture? That's what we're going to be discussing today. As always, let me introduce our co-host, ASL interpreter, Stephen Mogul. Thank you again, Stephen. I know you're unwell today. Thank you so much for showing up and always being my amazing team member on the virtual couch. If you ever want to reach out to support Stephen, please check out the link in the deck or that Laura always sends out afterwards at Stephen's GoFundMe page. Here she is. Miss Leticia Nieto. I may have already referred to the book Beyond Inclusion, Beyond Empowerment, a developmental strategy to liberate everyone. I've referred to this, Leticia, in pretty much every Unlearning panel. Any of our clients who are on the call, you have heard me refer to this book and to this author. But Leticia has been doing this work for many years. She's a leadership coach, a psychotherapist, and an educator specializing in liberation and equity. Internationally, she's recognized for her expertise addressing social justice concerns from a developmental and ecological perspective. I really encourage you all to check out her course, Rupture and Repair, which is starting on September 9th. Leticia, godmother in the work, welcome to the virtual couch.
Thank you.
For those who are still, they're like, I'm here because I feel like I was supposed to be here. Something about cancel culture sounded intriguing. Leticia, what, in your opinion, is cancel culture?
Well, it's there's so much to say, right? But I think it is a developmental crisis, an emergent crisis on the way to true community accountability. So it is a moment of disequilibrium in our collective growth that could derail us and distract us away from the goal, which is to come to hold an accountability that is relational and deep. So cancel culture, which I don't even like using exactly that term, but the tendencies that we'll be discussing today are a function of reaction to either the failures of or the dehumanization of sort of classic state endorsed justice, the ways in which those kinds of processes fail or dehumanize. And so this is kind of all the way over on the other side of the pendulum in place of really wanting to take hold of justice process. And somewhere in the middle there will be what we might consider community accountability and relational accountability. So that's where I'll leave it for now.
Yes, yes. I mean, Wow. So everybody go ahead, put on your thinking caps, because you see, we're going to get right into it nice and deep really fast. So many terms there that I want us to break down. What is collective justice or collective liberation? Can you just unravel that for us?
Yeah, I mean, I've been relying on this quote from Adrienne Marie Brown, which I will put in the chat. I'm sure almost everybody can sing along to this one. Um, and so I'll put it in here and we can all look at it together. I have a vision of movement as sanctuary, not a tiny perfectionist utopia behind miles of barbed wire and walls and fences and tests and judgments and righteousness, but a vast sanctuary where our experiences as humans who have experienced and caused harm are met with centered, grounded invitations to grow. This
Mm,
is Adrienne Marie Brown, and I think that's an image to hold as we sit in this. Is that idea that what we're working to create is an accountable space, certainly, but one that is oriented towards growth.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. I want everybody to hold that in in the top of your mind's eye, a space that is oriented towards growth. Wow, wow. Ari Felix is a multidisciplinary philosopher, seer, and advisor to world builders. Currently on the land that I grew up within this country, so really feeling that connection, Ari, that, kind of indigenous to Pennsylvania. We can talk about the changing of the leaves that the rest of the country doesn't really experience. But in your work, you're dedicated to being in sacred relationship with the planetary ancestors, including the earth, which I think is a really wonderful call out, because it's not just the earth, right? And through your grief literate and trauma informed practice, you've been supporting shapeshifters and world builders like yourself in creating self-love and spiritual freedom for over a decade. And oftentimes when we talk about we're in the space of business, Ari, we've got our business, what was I telling you? My secondhand dress on. It's my business secondhand dress. When we hear words like self-love and spiritual freedom, we're like, whoa, this is very touchy-feely sort of stuff. One, is it? And why is it that self-love and spiritual freedom are deeply connected when we're talking about DEI, when we're talking about the term cancel culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think that cancel culture, to use that example, is a symptom of the absence of self-love and the absence of spiritual freedom. It's really symptomatic of like hatred of the self. And spiritual freedom to me is the ways that we get free outside of the constructs and outside of the kind of like designated areas of like intellectual freedom or social capital as freedom, or even like a connection to culture as freedom. Like there are all these ways or definitions of freedom that aren't available to everyone. And by spiritual, I really mean spirit. Like I mean it very literally. It's not a synonym for some kind of mysterious practice that I'm like actually referring to. I very much so mean spirit, freedom of the spirit. And so when you have freedom of the spirit, you become incredibly ineligible to dominant culture. Like Bayo Komalafe, one of my favorite philosophers, says, like, you become fugitive. That freedom of spirit is to be slippery in the hands of these like cultural wounds, communal wounds that we're experiencing, or even you become slippery to the constructs that they are born out of and enable.
Wow. But wait a second. So I'm listening today and I'm listening to you and Leticia share, and what if my first thought coming up is, well, but I've been hurt. So I've been hurt. They've been hurting my people. Yes, my natural reaction should be to grab the, social media pitchfork. My natural reaction should be to take down in a just and vengeful fashion. Is that not, I don't know if it's not right, or is that not the full story? Can you tell us more?
Like, what does self-love and spiritual freedom, like what alternative does it provide to that mechanism? Yeah. So for me, that's really a shift out of reactivity into response ability, which is the ability to respond. And so coming from an orientation of in what manner, in what response in this situation indicates or originates from a place that demonstrates that I love myself. What response in this situation comes from a place that demonstrates that my spirit is moving towards freedom, and a freedom that isn't just about my freedom to enact vengeance, but also it's a freedom that also includes you, that I want you to be free as well. I want you to love yourself as well. And so I think the question that you asked is like deceivingly simple, because it's an extraordinary, like that's where the initiation happens. That shift from reactivity and defense, right? And even this just very sacred place of protecting, right? The sacred gesture towards protecting. To move from that into something that is more responsive and is more oriented towards love is like, it can feel like a decapitation. It's often like involves a complete rewiring of the nervous system. So I think it's like, it's not an easy shift, and it's not an easy reorientation, depending on how deeply you've been immersed in dominant culture and like all the wounds that come with it that have, given us what we're talking about today, which is cancel culture. Yeah, does that answer the question?
More than you know. Yes. Yes.
Cool.
Meet Nicole Osa, cultural development strategist and human-centered DEI leader. And for those of you lucky to live near us in Washington, Nicole is leading a team of 18 DEI professionals with the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services. So this is grassroots work happening every day. And I found myself in a conversation with somebody a few weeks ago who said, I just wish there was somebody around here doing this work to educate people about racism and homophobia and transphobia and ageism and all the things under the umbrella of DEI and dominant cultural norms. Well, now everybody, you can say, I know somebody, their name is Nicole. I have their contact details. Nicole, because you work in DEI often in what we call quote unquote professional spaces, can you build on what Ari and Leticia were naming in terms of, have you seen this real tendency for people who are early on their social justice journey to really want to take heads? That is how they define their allyship, is to be the most incriminating of others. I see it in my work. I'm wondering how it shows up for you.
Yeah, I have seen that. Certainly, I absolutely have. And I just have to say, I could sit and listen to Ari and Leticia speak on this topic for hours today. So I'm really excited to be able to soak in what they're saying. I think that what we call cancel culture, and I also don't like using that term, to be honest. If I were to use my own terms, I might say habits of supremacy culture. I think that it's deeply linked to that habit. Um, and I use the word habit to talk about supremacy culture because so much of it is so sunk into the breakfast cereal we ate growing up, the fabric of the clothes we've worn, that it's unconscious and unknown. And when we wake up to this, the concepts that are embedded in what we call DEI or EDI or JEDI or whatever acronym is being used in an organization to talk about liberation work, when we wake up to that, there is, I think, an understandable and natural tendency to want to separate yourself, to draw that clean line and say, that is no longer me. Yes. I'm clean. I'm clean. And I can demonstrate that by pointing out who might not be, who is contaminated by this in a way that I'm not. It's harsh and hurtful and counterproductive to the actual goals of liberation, because it still holds that supremacy habit inside of it, right? It holds it and protects it, and rather than putting it under scrutiny to say, why am I thinking in terms of purity? Why am I thinking in terms of who can I separate myself from to define my goodness or to perform my goodness? One of the things I'm really, that I think on a lot is our interconnectedness in ways that are sometimes uncomfortable and messy, right? It's easy to be to talk about my interconnectedness with people that I feel really comfortable with and cozy with, that I feel in alignment with very naturally. But it might be more difficult to talk about interconnectedness in ways where it feels messy, where it feels like we don't necessarily have clear alignment or clear connection, or how are we interconnected? The ways that we are interconnected is not obvious, clear, or necessarily working well. Yeah. But to me, the reality of interconnectedness is so profound. Whether or not it feels good or is easy or is functioning well, it is a profound truth of life that I cannot exist without you or you or you or you. And that compounds, in that truth for me compounds in ways that are not always comfortable, but they are real.
Yes, yes. I feel like a good place to root as we go deeper here would be, Leticia, can you introduce the framework that kind of explains the journey of the ally and in their, kind of infancy in their allyship, and then the progression and maturation?
Yeah, so I think we might want to begin here, running a parallel process of understanding how these habits that Nicole was bringing up and these absences that Ari was pointing to show up both in aspects of our areas of social advantage and in areas of marginalization, because they're really separate and different, distinct, but there's an evolutionary process for both. So when we're looking at the evolution of the ally in terms of the aspects of our social profile that carry privilege and advantage, we go through a process of being numb and asleep or disconnected from the reality of injustice and inequity and dehumanization. We're even unconscious about the possibility that there is any other way than the way that we've inhabited, and it all looks normal or normative to us. So we go through a process of, beginning to recognize that there's something that is incongruent with that sense of all is well and all is right. And then we become really defensive and distant, seeking distance from anything that informs that. And when we widen that capacity, then we get into another form or habit, which is to try to minimize it. So yes, okay, there is inequality, there is inequity, there is injustice, but ultimately we're all humans, and ultimately we all suffer, and there's kind of a flattening effect. That's pretty much where the development tends to stagnate at. But if conditions line up, there's another sort of pop or another shift that comes of recognition of just how deeply embedded and how frequent and how pervasive dimensions and dynamics of privilege and marginalization are, and how much they affect our lives, and how much they are not a function of our personal intention, but a function of the broad impact of the systemic structures. And then beyond that comes the ability to engage in ways that counter that, that transform that. So it's a long, lifelong journey. I was reading recently that, a lot of traditions, some practices aren't even allowed until you're in midlife, and yet we want to start really young. So there's this paradox of how we want to approach liberation from our earliest possible moment, but there are some capacities that maybe come online in a more reliable way as we grow in our maturity and complexity. So that's on the side of privilege. On the side of marginalization, we spend a lot of our lives immersed in strategies of survival or methods of managing the inequality and dehumanization that is dished up moment by moment, historically, ancestrally, familially, socially, personally, intrapsychically, in all the ways. And we move through, again, a kind of a set of breaths. We move into degrees of confusion about that, where we start to wonder now, is it me? Is it us? Is it it? Where does it live? And then when the fog lifts, then we become potentially enraged and militant and really urgent to want to make change. So it shows up there as well. And then finally we grow wise and we come into some center where we begin to be at choice. So really true freedom begins there. And then finally we recenter or regroup around the fundamental inherent potency and decolonizing truth of our so-called marginal, but truly not lived experience. And so these are dovetailing all the time. And of course, the way that oppression works, it's kind of like a special virus that wants to interrupt anything that would threaten it, right? It just wants to live, like all memes. And so it responds to the threat of development, of awakening, of construction of more complex perspectives. And I think you have all signaled here that the trouble with cancel culture is it's not nuanced, right? By definition, it's reactive, it's not complex, and in some ways it's about saving energy. Like I'll just line up with whatever it is that's going to make me feel good or right, and stand against whatever the person du jour that is currently in that lens or in that role. And so it's like faux anti-oppression. It's a very superficial way to think about aligning with the deep commitment to transform the social context and to be the change that we want to see in the world. So at some point, I'd love to have us just define the distinct features of cancel culture. And I have a framework. You want me to do it right now?
Yes.
Come back. Okay, I'll go
Yes,
ahead and
please. Yes,
do it
please.
right now. All right. So this is Natalie Wynn's contribution. I think it's a pretty comprehensive piece. These are the 7 tropes. So let me just go through it real quick. The first part is presumption of guilt, right? There's no direct or private or facilitated communication. The idea of believing victims just translates into feelings of certainty about the guilt of the accused. And this includes rumor, innuendo, and anything unconfirmed reports. So I heard that somebody did something, that's enough. So that's step 1. The second one is abstraction, where there's something specific and concrete broadens into a more generic claim. So in the absence of specifics, the generic claim takes on a more iniquitous life. So instead of somebody has done or said something, it's somebody has done or said something for a long time,
Mm,
right? Then essentialism, which is a move from criticizing actions to constructing the person as problematic. So we move from someone's done something that I have an objection to that is a bad person. They are a somethingist, and it's essentializing them. Then we go to pseudomoralism, where there's a pretext for the call out. There's a pretense to seek apology, a pretext of, well, we're wanting to advocate for people who don't have voice, but actually what it is a kind of, I don't know, getting off on the attacking frame, right? The payoff is to bring someone down, and that can sound like so and so needs to be stopped. They need to stop. They're being harmful. They are conducting harm. Then there's an absence of grace, otherwise known as no forgiveness, where the counselors will dismiss any apology as insincere, no matter how convincing or how heartfelt. Of course, an insincere apology is further proof of the wrongness or the badness of the person. So a good apology can also then be reinterpreted as evidence of the wrongdoing. So there's sort of a place, there's nowhere to go here. There's no repair possible. Yeah, so there's a way that once in the grip of this consciousness, there's really nothing you can do, because anything that you do or say will be held against you, kind of thing. Then there's transivity, which is that if you're associated with a canceled person, then you are enabling, you are toxic by association, and you're tarnished. And people feel this and line up, right, in order to prevent the thing happening to them. And in a lot of the literature, we hear people actually reporting that. I just didn't want it to come at me, so I sold you out. Sorry, but I just couldn't have that happen to me, which is so disturbing. Yeah, so, and even if you don't know the person that's being attacked or canceled, there is an impulse to want to avoid that attack on oneself. And finally, dualism, which is there's no spectrum, there's no nuance, bad or good, right or wrong, which is dehumanizing, and it leads to a shape. And here's the shape: accuse, publicly shame, punish, and then exile, which, if you think about it, sounds an awful lot like the industrial prison complex sequence. So this is where we come back to Nicole's assertion that we are actually looking at a shape that is supremacy culture.
yes. Which, I don't have the words. Do we just all need to take a moment and take a breath on that? Yes. Yes. Speaking for myself, Leticia and Ari and Nicole, even just taking a breath to humbly say, I see myself in the act, right? I see myself in the act. I have also thrown rocks at glass houses, right? And done it in the, lofty space of, oh, I'm a DEI practitioner and leader, so it's okay when I am doing this to somebody because of insert reasoning that the psychosis goes through. Is anybody else? Yeah? Are you feeling called out? Feeling a little seen? Yeah? Gonna go and cancel your Instagram profile? Oh, that shows my age. TikTok? Wait, let's get about Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. Is that still around? I'll ask my teenager later. Ari, what in not embracing, even in this moment, the supremacy culture norm for me now to hide behind my shame, for me to escape into justification to feed my own egoic need to stay a good person? How do I infuse love for myself as I become aware of how, as Leticia said, the virus of supremacy will continue to try to invite me back in?
It's a beautiful question. It really is the question, I think. Shame isn't constructive, I believe. Like shame more so functions as a distraction or as a redirection towards the symptom of the wound than an investigation into what the wound itself is. So I think before we can apply love and understanding and compassion to something, we need to have an understanding of what it is. Like we need to know where it is we're applying that exactly, you know? So like before you can address something that's happening in the physical body, you need to know what is happening so that you can address it directly. Because even if you're addressing like something else or something adjacent, if it's not direct, it's not going to result in a change. And so in this case, we're talking about the emotional body. And in the beginning, you asked, you know, you were like, self-love and spiritual freedom can sound very touchy-feely, and is it? And I, you know, speaking to my concepts and experience, it's not. You know, it's one of the most rigorous disciplines you can ever pursue. And I think that's something that we kind of generally vaguely know in the world, you know, that like spiritual practitioners who have been at their craft for decades are greatly respected because we have a kind of somatic understanding of what it requires to take on that level of emotional maturity and spiritual discipline on. So I love what Leticia said about the maturation cycle, you know, on whichever side of the spectrum of like constructed opposition you're in. Cancel culture is a result of emotional immaturity. Like it's not a result just of constructs and, you know, of, oh, we are trying to do something better, we're trying to make something right. We're trying to do something better, we're trying to make something right from a place of emotional and cultural immaturity, of like not understanding how relationship and how community actually works and actually functions. And this is naturally a result of colonialism, right? And this like supremacy culture that Nicole named, like there's in the severance from our origins, in the severance from our cultures and the ethics and values, the interests and principles that our cultures come embedded with, in the severance from that, something else tries to emerge and take its place, you know, born out of the supremacy culture, supremacy habits, as Nicole said. And that is, I think, the deepest wound of cancel culture, that cancel culture points to, is this severance from the ethics and values that our culture, when we're connected to it, our people, when we're connected to them, that we're supposed to be brought up in. And I also want to quickly, in this like defining cancel culture, and I noticed the like hesitancy in general to name cancel culture and to call it by name and to use that terminology. And I think sometimes that's in an absence of understanding what cancel culture exactly is. So Leticia did a beautiful job of like naming the mechanisms of how it operates. But the only way that it actually functions in our reality, you know, 2022, in like the past decade or so that it's been active and kind of accelerating. We're seeing the de-acceleration now. But it operates from something that can be called the nexus, which is this intersection of identity, authoritarianism, social media, and cancel culture. The social media part is really important because it's not like, oh, because of social media, suddenly we're all monsters. As someone who's Jewish, I know very, very well that the mechanisms of cancel culture have been operating for centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries. That's like every genocide, every inquisition, every expulsion operates on the same mechanisms that Leticia laid out that cancel culture does. So it's not because of social media, but social media is what makes it international. So it makes something that happens in small town communities all the time. If someone's like, oh, this person did that, oh, they did, and then that person's like, why does no one like me anymore? You know, takes that same thing and puts it somewhere where all over the world people can participate and engage. And that's what makes cancel culture different than like the same things we've been experiencing in communities since the beginning of time. Yeah. Right? So identity authoritarianism is the other part of this intersection. And that's where the cancellation part comes in. So I think cancel culture is actually an accurate terminology to describe what's trying to happen, like what the intention is when there's a cancellation campaign directed at someone. It's to literally completely remove them. Right? To cancel someone is to completely remove them. We want to remove their access to livelihood. We want to remove their access to support. We want to remove their access to community. We want to remove their access to everything. They need to cease to exist. And that's the punitive ideology. But what makes cancel culture distinct is that a lot of this punitive ideology is stemming from identity authoritarianism, which says that because I hold a specific intersection of identities, it can be one, it can be several, that place me in marginalization. Therefore, anything that I'm saying is law. Like I must be correct because I'm not white. I must be correct because I'm disabled. I must be correct because I'm poor. So rather than as a culture and as communities developing a rigorous ethic and a rigorous political analysis, we're just taking identity and saying my identity is the analysis. In the absence of the structure and the strictures of an actual analysis, there's all these binaries start popping out, right? It's either or, it's this or that, it's bad, good, it's right, wrong, because something has to fill up all the space that there is when you haven't actually gone through those cycles that Leticia laid out of maturing your worldview and maturing your emotional capacity, maturing your energetic bandwidth to tolerate the distress that is inevitable when you're interacting with other people who have also been impacted, regardless of whatever their identity intersection, by colonialism and by white supremacy. Yes. So cancel culture specifically is the way the wound plays out on social media. But trust and believe the wound is playing out everywhere, on and offline. And the wound, I think, that's all the way in deep in the root at the bottom is the severance from culture. And that's why I appreciate that cancel culture puts the word culture in there, because it's like, this is what we're trying to create safe culture, right? We're trying to create safe place, but it's culture without all these other things that culture needs to thrive and to be supportive. It's culture without real relationship. It's culture without values, interests, and principles. It's culture without analysis. It's culture without love. You know, and so this is the result of being conditioned by a dominant culture that teaches us all to hate ourselves. Of course, anything we're creating from that space is just gonna like self-perpetuate.
Yes.
So I know that was a little long, but I had
let's stop the culture where you apologize for taking space, because you know, like everybody think, you know, what a way to enter into that self-analysis. There's a tool that everybody could walk away with. Write this down. It's do I want to engage today in culture without analysis? Do I want to engage in culture without connection? Do I want to engage in culture without love? Do I want to engage in culture without, you know, working through the supremacy tendencies of either overthinking, perfectionism, fear of open discomfort, fear of open dialogue, et cetera, et cetera. And so I love even that, the both and there. It's remember that if this is cancel culture, on the other side, you are actively choosing a culture of, and here are the characteristics of it. Are these norms and standards that you choose? Why or why not? Yes, yes. Nicole, somebody is on the call today. Somebody's in the space today or watching the recording at home, drinking hopefully a lovely Syrah. And they are like, oh, I get everything Leticia said. I get everything Ari said. I'm probably going to read 5 books afterwards still, but are they telling me that I should just like not say anything about the senator that did that thing, or that I should not say anything about the executive leader that repeatedly did that thing? Like, can you help bring it home?
Yeah. Well, first, make sure one of those 5 books is Leticia's book, because that will really help you. So just start there. And Sarah's a good place to start too. Yeah, excellent book. I use it every day, every single day of my life. That book influences me. So thank you for your work, Leticia. So I've been thinking about, so mind blown here. So thank you also, Ari and Lindsay and Leticia, for naming the word love as a force that is in on the other side of that spectrum from canceling. We do not cancel what we love, right? We don't cancel what we love. I'm thinking about, as folks have been talking, some of the things that have been coming into my mind is the context of what were the different nuances and the different contexts of canceling versus accountability, right? Canceling is actually not accountability. There is no pathway for accountability. There is no pathway for change or for reparation or for any kind of accountability from harm when someone is cast out, which is the end result of canceling. So when I think of, that habit of supremacy of we're going to find the impurity and we're going to, root it out and discard it. We're going to cancel it. I think about what I associate with that is an intention to shame, an intention to shun, an intention to humiliate, to drive out, to remove, to disappear. Think about that. That word is in my mind when I think about canceling. We want to disappear it. I'm going to just tell you the body sensation I have when I say that word. I feel like a catch in my chest and some goosebumps on my arm, because to me, to disappear is so incredibly harmful, because we are literally disappearing the humanity, whether or not it's pretty or agreeable to us. But we're also disappearing the issue, the opportunity that exists with whatever is at play in the scenario or with the person. To me, that's canceling. Accountability is the opposite. Accountability is opening up, it's discovery. It certainly can be incredibly uncomfortable calling out big emotions. And accountability is about more than just the individual. Canceling is often about an individual source, right? So it's looking at where's that individual source that we can root out and discard or disappear. Whereas accountability, that is more systemic, right? For lunch, I had grapes. I'm going somewhere with this, because every time I eat grapes, we have grapes that are just starting to get ripe outside. But every time I eat grapes, I think about this, how I never had grapes growing up. I didn't eat a grape until I was an adult. Because when I was young, there was a major boycott of grapes, right? Some of you may remember this or participated in no grape eating in the 70s and 80s. There was a major boycott of grapes, and this was something that was like a hard line in my family. We don't eat grapes. This is why, because we don't want to participate in harm done to a community of people. There's a movement around this. So to me, that wasn't canceling. There was no individual being canceled or even a single industry or corporation being canceled. It was a community action to draw attention to an important systemic change that needed to happen and to support that systemic change. There is a world of difference in that kind of action, which is accountability based, versus going to an individual who has perhaps done great harm even, or we don't know, or there's some rumor around it. And individually sort of saying, we can cast this person out. We can root this person out, right? It's not changing any kind of systemic issue that's at play. It's operating off of an assumption that, if we can just find, the 10 or 20 or 15 or however many people, individual humans that are toxic enough, they're creating the problem, then we'll be okay. Well, it's not, there are certainly folks who are, bad actors, and I think it's a different conversation actually to talk about the difference between harm and abuse, and when that's at play within an individual, how you address that and what the community response is to that, than to talk about this culture of cancellation and where you focus your energy either at that individual level or at that systemic level. The difference between you don't eat a grape or you are tweeting someone's name repetitively with an innuendo, or you're trying to root out, cast out, shame, shun, disappear a person in hopes or that practice will create some sort of change to the system. It will not. It will not. We can root out, shun, shame, disappear individuals that perhaps there's evidence that they did do great harm, that they were in a perpetrator of some kind of great harm or abuse. But that's that one person. We have not changed our systems. We have not changed the ways that someone could have operated that way. And in fact, we may have entrenched some of the systemic ways that supported someone in operating in that way by not creating pathways of accountability, not creating an opportunity for accountability, and not doing this thing, which is really, really, really hard. And I'm saying this as a collective us, looking at the collective us and saying, if this can happen here, this is a we problem. This is something that we all have some accountability for in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. I'm going to pause there because that was a lot.
Thank you a lot. Yeah. I mean, it's a completely different lens by which, when we think about restorative community justice, of that one person's actions are a potential symptom of something that's happening in the community that needs to be treated. And instead of casting out, we need to embrace and bring back in to understand what the community needs to do to change, to grow, to mature, to develop, to heal. Yeah. Ari, in your work, I love this exercise or exercises around world building. And oftentimes when I am reading quotes from bell hooks, for example, to some of my students, they're going, I have no frameworks by which to imagine that world. I literally, when she's talking about communion, I don't know what she's talking about. When she's talking all about love, I don't know what she's talking about. When she's talking about the existence of male identity outside of patriarchy, I don't know what she's talking about. Before we open it up to questions from our community here, I'd love to hear from each of you. In this world that you are in the process of building, because you give yourselves to this practice every day and to the practice within your work, what is the world that you are building, Ari? What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? What does it taste like? What does it touch like? What's the world that you're building, Ari?
Thank you for that question. I'll respond to that in terms of our topic today, like the world that I'm building in response and taking up my responsibility with cancel culture is one that respects and honors the sanity of our children. Our children, to speak in mass generalization, are spending a lot of time on the internet. Cancel culture is so close to them. It's been part of their reality in these very formative years. And cancel culture works. Like one of the kind of retorts to naming cancel culture is people are like, that's not real, it doesn't work, you can't do anything. And it's this removal, as with any like area of privilege or lack of experience, this removal from the impacts of cancel culture. Like people have died because of it. People have lost their homes, have lost their livelihoods. There's actually a research study that I should have sent to Laura before, maybe I can still, but a doctor who has done research into how cancel culture has impacted people on a very like material and also psychological level. So the world that I'm building in response to this is one where people are connecting to their ancestors. And not just, like I said in the beginning, not just like culturally bound, because so many of us don't have access to knowing like the names of our ancestors or where they were exactly or what they were doing, what they did, what languages they spoke. But so I want to open entryways, or even just like remind people that there are entryways into being in relationship with their ancestors and with spirit, that can kind of fill this gap, fill this deep, deep longing for connection that cancel culture is a distortion of. And so the world that I'm building in response to cancel culture is about our children. It's a 7 generations world. It's like about giving us something else to connect to so that it's less easy to become distorted, right? Less easy for our longing for love and connection to be completely misdirected into what we've been told love and protection and connection looks like. So it's really this kind of, to circle back to the beginning, it's really a world of self-love and spiritual freedom, but in every facet, and not just the kind that comes from having a political analysis, but the kind that comes from having a spiritual analysis, which is to understand what is it inside that's co-creating this reality in which so many of us are hurting. And the way we think there is to stop the hurting is to hurt each other even more. You know, like, where is that coming from? Because it's not coming from the mind. It's not coming from rationale. It's not coming from the intellect.
Yes. Yes. Oh, goodness. Well, it's a whole nother session. I've been doing this healing work, whole nother time. My great grandmother was murdered and watched her son be murdered, and she was murdered. And I'm just realizing how her rage, her unexpressed rage, has impacted all of the women in my life for so many years. And such a common Black woman story. But as I go in and become a vessel for her to express this rage that Black women still are not often allowed to express, but definitely then, so much more love for myself and for every aspect of the universe.
May I add something to that?
Please.
Thanks for bringing that in, because I think that's one piece we didn't mention, which is like, the reason why I said cancel culture is a result of emotional immaturity is because the emotions are there, right? The rage, the fear, the shame, the guilt, like all of these are emotions are sensations, right? That's the experience that's being had. And when we can confront rage and we can look rage in the eyes and see it for what it is, instead of pretending that it's righteousness or pretending that it's retribution or pretending it's revenge, but when we can just look at rage directly, and we can look in its eyes and see that like past the fire is this deep, deep oceanic well of grief. And that's at the root of motivation of so many of our participation in cancel culture, is this deep unexpressed rage, like you said, this deep ancestral rage that is actually in its root grief. And it's grief about that original severance that I named earlier.
Yes. Wow. Nicole, what are you world building?
Well, while I'm living in Ari's world, because I love that so much, I'm really seeking to build a world where we can embrace complexity, right? Where we can hold that many things are true at the same time. And within that, we can allow mistakes. We can bring mistakes forward. We can allow missteps. We can bring those forward. We can allow unlearning needs and bring them forward. We can let drop pretense that we know what we're doing all the time, that we have known what we're doing, and that everything that we did with intention and was the right thing to do, because we can stand without feeling fearful that our relevancy and humanity won't be held. That's a world I want to create. And in the context of where I'm at a lot of the time, this is a pretty big deal. It's the difference between a social and human services delivery system that's constantly saying, how do we make sure that people look at us as doing the right thing? It's the difference between that stance and saying, we're not sure we are doing the right thing. Come help us learn. Or we know that we did harm. We want to be accountable. Come help us understand what accountability means. That's a world I want to work in, where we have a frame for that kind of courage, the kind of courage that I think is necessary for actual systemic change. So when we talk about dismantling systems, we're actually really, to me, I'm thinking we're talking about building systems that are have never really existed in a particular way. And we're talking about, this is the thing that we sometimes forget, systems are people. There's a, they can just sort of perpetuate if we don't get conscious and active and intentional, but systems are people. So we can very much build a different kind of system to enact and to work with people in a way that works better.
Yeah. Nicole, as you're sharing and just again marinating on how words like excommunication and traditions of the church of just casting out are really popping up. And again, I think we'll have to do an exploration around the marriage between religion and supremacy separate from spirituality and the path of love that Ari's talking about. Leticia, what world are you building?
Well, again, I'm moving in with Nicole and Ari.
Can I bring popcorn?
You can come too, yeah.
Okay.
The world that I want to live in and the world that I'm working to build is one where we have all the tools. So I'm going to rewind just a little bit to say that I don't want the traditions, the pre-colonial and decolonized methodologies that include exile as a possible outcome. I don't want that out of our repertoire either. So how I want to think about that is that we want all of the tools. So I've sat at the feet, metaphorically online, of Loretta J. Ross and Lone Tran, and here's a website, who talk a lot about calling in and the difference. One of the main things, one of the early things that I heard from Loretta Ross was that we are not discerning which tools to use with whom. That the words that she used that will never leave me are the inside of movement, those with whom we fundamentally have shared values and shared commitment, that we adopt tools that ought to be reserved for war, for when we're really going to the wall, right? And so what she said was, let us not be a firing squad in the round, but rather remember that there are times to bring that kind of instrument. And so I just want to name the funa, the Chilean funa, and the Argentinian and Brazilian escarche tradition into the field. So the funa comes from a Mapudungun word, which is an indigenous community in Chile and Argentina. And a funa is a well-researched, proven, right, set of data that are publicly brought forward in the context of ritual for the purposes of accountability in response to things like disappearing people, terror, genocide, right? So especially a little bit in the 80s, but mostly since 1990 something, there was a series of these actions kind of prior to internet work where, with a lot of dignity and attention, war criminals were exposed. And that it has the shape of a cancellation, except that it isn't based on rumor and innuendo, but rather on outcomes of actually investigations and legal outcomes. And that at that point, see, this is where, and if you want to look at video, just look up funa or escarche. The way you spell that is F-U-N-A or escarche. And you'll see the children of the disappeared and the mothers of the disappeared coming together with a lot of solemnity and quietude, and then some noise, and they go and confront the person. This is after all other options have been explored. So we don't want to take anything off the table when it comes to our tools, but we don't want to go there first. This is the key. So what I want to build is a world of discernment where we continue to be attuned to the developmental moment, where we have durable bonds, where transformation is possible, and when not, that we at least have a stepwise process of checking in, and then calling out, and then canceling, if we really need to. But that hopefully the kind of community building that we do will be invitational, because nobody grows from being threatened or pulled on, but there's a quality of creating the conditions for the natural outcome, which is deep community and durable bonds. And where, the kintsugi idea, where repair leads to stronger bonds, where there is a possibility that the person who was identified as doing the worst thing is, first of all, proven to have done the worst thing and not just a rumor, and then potentially brought into the center as having done a service because they brought forth what was in the community. So in the Zapatista tradition in southern Mexico, there is a process where it's not called restorative justice, but it's along those lines, where a visitor, somebody who's coming through town, commits a crime. They are invited to remain in community and bring accountability and repair to the harm that they've done, rather than be imprisoned or exiled. And so really reducing the exile to the very, 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 very last thing you could ever do. And, if you think about it, Nicole said to cancel is to disappear. And traditionally and pre-colonially, it was disappearances by state, by government. It was disappearing people that resulted in the methodology of cancellation, like funa. So it is the worst thing we can do, and it's the worst thing that we can have happen to us, is to be deleted, disappeared, made nothing. So when we imagine that that's medicine, right? It can't be. It's worse than the disease. So that's the invitation, and just to kind of stay connected to the idea that that we want to have all of our tools, and we want to use the least harmful, potentially harmful thing, and the most world building and community creating tools first, and in an attuned way, judge when and if it is ever appropriate to delete someone.
Wow. Wow. I just need to sit back and chew on that, Leticia, Ari, and Nicole. Wow. Emily Black, I wanted to invite you up to ask this question of the panel. Emily Black, are you still there? Want to come off of mute?
Yeah. Hi. So was it the question about how to bring people into community?
Yeah. What's your question there?
So I do have community that in life where there are kind of a systems of accountability and checks and balances. Obviously, the cancellation thing is hard to unlearn, and it's not like it's perfect, but I feel like, especially online, and I feel like I've seen a lot of it on LinkedIn recently, that there's been a kind of schisms being made by people making harmful statements or people interpreting things as harmful and whatnot. And I don't know how we can encourage people who do harm to stay within community. Like, you're speaking before about how if a stranger passes through, you have them stay within the community so that they can, be brought to accountability and to, also contribute and kind of, see the harm that they've caused and hopefully do that again to a different community. But online with the tools of like blocking and kind of the encouragement of people to protect their peace and whatnot, people are very quick to exile. So I guess I was just curious, both in real life, but also especially online, how you guys would suggest building tightly knit communities where those type of actions can be made.
Great question, Emily. Open to Nicole, Ari, or Leticia.
I'll just speak briefly, and this isn't specific to online or in real life, but to both. Intentional community building immediately. Make that the priority before anything else. In your workplace, the priority before whatever work is on the agenda, whatever strategic plan or outcome, the community building. In an online forum, the priority before everything else. And I say that because I think it's much harder to create community connection and to create community where accountability can happen when some kind of harm does happen, because it's part of our world, it will happen. But before that happens, after that happens, it's like, it's just so much more difficult to kind of go back in time and say, oh, hold on a second. We actually forgot to remind ourselves that we're a community first and to create that space as a community before we did anything else. I will often as I can remember, I try to remind anyone I'm in contact with, that's not an afterthought. It's not extra. That is the work. No matter what else is happening, that is the work to be a community first. So those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah. Emily, I would offer, we here in this space that we create together each month, had an experience recently where let's say our community guidelines were tested or in question. And although we always lead with, these are our community guidelines, this is the space we're creating. And I know at times in our busy days, the time that we take just to breathe together in the beginning of each session can feel like, are we done yet, Linz? Let's get to the panel, right? But all of that is in service to the expectation that we have in creating this time and space together. And so one of the big things that I always find is an orientation to time is a really great way to distinguish between spaces that are trying to be intentional in their commitment to community building and spaces that are transactional. And if within the first 30 seconds or a minute, you're already in transaction, that can tell you a little bit about what you can expect for when your humanity inevitably shows up.
And on that, Lindsay, I wonder if you'd be willing to sing with me if all other microphones are closed. I have a song here that I want to share by Carrie Newcomer. So can I sing a line and you sing it after me?
Yes, please.
Will you be my refuge?
My haven in the storm.
No, just the same line. Will you be my refuge?
Will you be my refuge?
My haven in the storm.
My haven in the storm.
Will you keep the embers warm?
Will you keep the embers warm?
When my fire's all but gone.
When my fire's all but gone.
Will you remember?
Will you remember?
Bring me springs of rosemary.
Bring me springs of rosemary.
Be my sanctuary.
Be my sanctuary.
Till I can carry on.
Till I can carry on.
Thank you, Lindsay. I just wanted to put a note here that this is happening and it will happen to many of us in this space. And it doesn't have to be the absolute end of the world. I've experienced both Nicole and Ari and others a sanctuary. And I think that's part of what we build, the sanctuary with each other and the commitment to see each other through when some version of the public humiliation comes.
Let's take a final breath together. Let us hold this sanctuary for one another for another minute, for another hour, for another day. Let it ripple and ripple and ripple out for as long as we can maintain it, friends. Thank you for unlearning with me today, and Leticia and Stephen and Ari and Nicole and Laura Kay. Happy Wednesday.
My haven in the storm, will you keep the embers warm?
Thank you so much, everyone. I am going to put you back into the waiting room, not because we don't love you, but simply because I'm gonna bug the panel and just tell them how awesome they are, and nobody wants to hear me weep. So I will be putting you in there.
Carry on, carry on. This one knocked me to the ground. This one dropped me to my knees. I should have seen it coming, but it surprised me. Will you be my refuge? My haven in the storm. Will you keep the embers warm when my fire's all but gone? Will you remember? And bring me sprigs of rosemary, be my sanctuary till I can carry on, carry on, carry on.
Thanks, Laura. That was really great.
Stephen, I could just watch you speak all day.
Yes.
like watching a dancer.
Mhm. Yes.
How
thank
is
you.
everyone?
Sweaty.
It's a little warm over here.
Yeah. So we'll just go meet for drinks and have dinner. Some
Perfect.
rice and beans. Well, yeah. Wow. Wow. Wow.
Great work, Stephen. You have the buffest arms in the entire world, I guess, because like just the whole time it looked really beautiful. Like Lindsay said, it's like watching choreography. And I have to say, having been in these learnings for a year now, this was such a response from the audience, the participants, just the amount of building on top of what you all were saying and just giving +1s and reactions and everything. I can tell that it was really sitting with people and touching them. And I think something that based on that response seems like it's been there's been a hunger for it, and that this hasn't fully been addressed. And I'm just really grateful for each of you speaking with so much groundedness and honesty. And yeah, there was just so much feedback. I'm like, this chat, including my DMs, are like on fire right now. I'm making sure that I've got all people's questions logged. Yeah, such a response.
Yeah.
Was there anything, Lindsay often asks this, was there anything that came up, this is our after the panel segment, that you wanted to say that you're like, oh, everybody just left and there's one more thing, anything kind of dangling that way?
I think one thing that I would have maybe wanted to do, just to drill a little bit more, the difference between specificity and vagueness in conducting our accountability work. But I think it was there. It was in the field. Oh, Nicole,
Yeah,
your sound went
Oh.
away.
I have a double mute. I sometimes forget. I was just going to say, I really appreciated how you pulled things in that last piece there, Leticia, to talk about, the complexities of sometimes we need when there is great harm, how this is a tool. We don't want to get rid of all of our tools. And I don't feel like there was things that I left unsaid, but I think there was an interesting conversation threaded through here about the difference between kind of that individual cancel culture, that person's bad and wrong, so we're getting rid of them, versus justice, right? How one is not necessarily the other, and justice has a complex arc that doesn't always feel satisfying, or doesn't actually, repair a harm, but it's something. And I think you began to get us there a little bit, Leticia. So I was glad for that.
Well, and I think Ari too, there was something, well, in all of what you were saying, a theme that was coming up for me and trying to see what was happening in the chats, but there were like, as Laura said, there were like 50 at one point when I looked up. There's a desperation for community, in the sense that by joining in the canceling somebody, I'm getting community, although it is a false community, although it is a vapid, arid, dry of actual community. And I think that also is the legacy of supremacy, is that, all I could think of was this line in this movie. Is it like The American President or something, with Kirk Douglas, where he says something to him about people are so desperate for water, they would drink the sand, and his friend fires back, people drink the sand because they don't know the goddamn difference. And that was what was hitting me. Like, they think that by piling on, they're getting community. And Ari, you were really naming that, of like what actual community might feel like. And then with the song and the, you know, bringing it to what sanctuary in another.
It's so important in critiquing cancel culture to not replicate the exact same thing and just be like, cancel culture is bad and everyone who participates in cancel culture is bad. Like, you know, it's kind of, it's really absurd when you think about it, as it always is. You know, how are you just keep doing the same things? And that's why the spiritual analysis is so important to me, because like people think, you know, the intellect is God in the West, right? And it's like, think that having an analysis or understanding on a theoretical level what's going on absolves you from your like neurological attachment to it, but it doesn't. You know, like to do that is to do the same thing. And so, like I said, the only entryway into compassion is to ask, well, what's hurting here? You know, and this is like so much of another way to like to understand cancel culture is to think about, there's so much bad parenting going on. So many people never had their parents say to them, oh my God, like you behaved in this way, what's wrong? What's the matter? What's hurting? You know, and this conflation between punitive and puritanical ideologies with justice, you know, that stems from there as well. And it's like, the reason why we have all these distortions around justice is because we struggle to make peace with the fact that justice isn't actually about retribution or outcome. Justice isn't actually a tangible thing. You know, like justice, you know, the kind of like no justice, no peace, right? Because like justice is peace, and peace is a sensation. It's not something that you can grab and be like, you know, here's my justice. And so we'll continue to like, we're going to continue to flail around this. We're going to continue to fumble and drop the ball until we are able to accept that justice is actually a neutral thing. It's a neutral thing. It's not a right, wrong, good, bad outcome result thing. But that's terrifying. It's terrifying to just be in that gray area of like, there is no justice. You know, it's a difference between restorative justice and transformative justice. Like people just use those interchangeably, but they're actually different. Restorative justice is something has been lost that can be restored. You stole my $20, so you can give me $20. Justice, restored. Transformative justice is like, you can't restore the life of my son that you took. You must be in need of deep transformation because of that behavior. And that's transformative justice. And so justice is not one thing. It's highly contextual. And so we'll take every culture as a culture, even if the culture is dry and insipid and unsupportive, it's still a culture. We'll take it. We want it. We need it. That's what we do. We create culture just by default. We don't have to try. You throw a bunch of people together, you know, they're going to have a culture. We see this in freaking school, you know, kids do it right away. Like their group, them and their group of friends, they have their own culture. It's what we do. But trying to create a culture around justice, trying to create a culture around an abstract principle is impossible.
So good.
So we have a
good.
TED Talk that's the three of you.
Yeah.
And it's like we've submitted our panel for a TED Talk because this is what people need. I did have somebody already message and say you have to do a part 2 on this. So
Okay.
just putting it out there now. If you
Be
get
down.
another
The time
message.
went so fast. I couldn't believe it. I was like, we barely touched the tip of it.
I had so many notes.
Me too. I have so
You all,
many
you all
notes.
were like saying all the things. I was like, check. I'm never going anywhere without you anymore. That's just,
Yes.
I don't
This
enjoy
works.
it.
This works.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you, Nicole and Ari, for saying yes. This would have been a very different experience if it hadn't been all of us, so I'm grateful.
Yeah. Thank
It
you.
was an honor to speak with both of you, with all of you.
Yeah, same. Thank you, Laura, for all your coordination support. And thank you for just a lovely conversation. Really lovely to meet you, Ari, and listen to the wonderful, wonderful words and thoughts you have to share. And Leticia, it's just always a joy to talk with you. I gotta go.
Yeah, thank you so much for
lovely
your
to
time,
meet you
everybody.
too.
Recording's going out this week, so I'm excited to get the feedback on that. Thank you so much. This was
All right.
glorious.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.